Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is our first recorded lesson for course Introduction to Networks, and we're going to go through the online material provided by Cisco. So, as we talked in class, Chapter 1 has already been covered in class. Chapter 2 will be covered in the lab, and we're going to go through Chapter 3 today. So chapter 3 talks about network protocols and communication. So this chapter is divided into three major sections. The first one is rules of communication. So we're going to talk about what are the very important rules that have to be established for successful communication. And then we're going to go through network protocols and standards. So we're going to define what protocols mean, how they work, and how they get developed. And then finally, we're going to go through how we can actually move data across networks. So, to talk about the first part in the material, as we all know, networks can be simply communication between two entities, similar to any communication that happens between two human beings. So, for example, for us as human beings to exchange ideas, our thoughts have to be mapped into words that can then go through the communication medium, whether this communication medium is actually through the air, or if we talk through the phone, or face to face, or through sending a letter, or through a telegraph, or whatever. So similar to that, computers, they actually exchange information in a similar way. So again, computers, to establish a communication between two entities or two devices, the source device will have to compose the information into predefined messages. These messages have to have certain structures, certain format, and so on, which we will talk about in details later. Then these messages have to be mapped into a signal or a form for transmission through a specific medium. The medium of communication in that case could be wired, could be wireless, could be fiber optics, and so on, until it's received by the receiver, which will then convert the signals back into messages for the application to consume. So as we said, computers will function the exact same way. This is the source and this is the receiver, and they consume the messages by composing a certain structured message. They send it through the medium until it arrives to the other receiver, and that's how we communicate messages through the different devices. So before this communication can actually happen, we have to establish very important rules of communication. So, for example, if two human beings are talking to each other and they are talking different languages, they won't be able to understand each other. But language is not the only thing. They have to define certain structure, for example, certain grammar. Otherwise, if we talk in a distorted language, we will not be able to understand each other. Also, we have to agree on certain speed. So if I talk in a very fast way, the other person will not be able to understand what I'm talking about. Also, we have to talk about a specific protocol or a specific means for us to acknowledge each other, to not or to show each other that we really understand every word that we are communicating to each other. So in a very similar way, computers, they do the exact same thing. So protocols have to be defined between devices in order for them to be able to exchange information. So first, computers have to establish rules regarding message encoding. So messages have to be structured in a format that's understandable by both parties. Formatting and size and the structure of the message has to be agreed upon. Also, this message, for example, if we exchange information through sending letters back and forth, then we have to put this message in an envelope, which what we call encapsulation. So we have to encapsulate this message in a form that's understandable or that can be transmitted across the network. The message size has to be agreed upon, in which case, if the message is too long, we have to divide this message into understandable sentences that can be transmitted over the network. Also, message timing is very important, so we have to agree on who should talk first and who can send message at any point in time so that the other person is able to receive. Message delivery options are also very important. So, for example, if I'm talking to a crowd, I can target a specific person amongst that crowd in a form of one-to-one communication, or I can target the whole crowd, in which case I can send a broadcast message to all the people in the room. So these are some of the things regarding how the message is structured for successful communication. So to dig deeper into that, so first we're going to talk about message encoder or message encoding. Again, as we said, message encoding talks about the fact that our information, an application that needs to send certain information like a web page or something like that, these information have to be converted into a form through what we call an encoder, have to be converted into a form of a message that's agreed upon, in which case the encoder has to represent the information from the application in a format which is understandable by the other person on the other side. So to understand this, this person wants to communicate a scenario of a trip or something that she needs to go through. And in order for her to do that, she has to map or convert her thoughts, whether she wants to go in a specific to do sightseeing or she wants to see certain view and so on and so forth. And she needs to convert that into words. These words have to have a certain language, have to have certain grammar, have to have certain structure and size that then can be sent whether through face-to-face communication or through the telephone, and then the other person will be able to convert back through what we call a decoding process. The decoding process will then convert these words back to the ideas or the thoughts that the source already initiated or composed to establish this communication. So, in order for us to do that, the messages that we communicate need to have certain characteristics. So, for example, if we need to send a letter through mail, then we have to have a certain structure of the message, and this message has to be encapsulated or put into an envelope which has certain structure and stamped in a specific way so that this mail message can arrive to the person on the other side. So, in order for this message to be delivered successfully, we have to have certain items. For example, we have to have an identified source and destination. And the source has to be identified so that if this mail has not been delivered to the person on the other side, it has to go back to the sender. So not only do we have to identify the destination, which is of course very important in that case, but we should also specify the sender or the initiator of that message. So the message itself has to have a certain structure. So for example, in the letter, the message has to start with a salutation or a greeting to indicate that this is the beginning of a message. And also the message has to have a certain content, and the message has to have a certain closing phrase, like for example, if when I say at the end of the letter, yours sincerely, Amr Muhammad, so I identify that this is the end of the message, and so on. So that's how we send a mail. So that's the structure of the message, and this is the identified sender, and all these structure has to be defined. So these are the different parts of the message. So I have to identify the destination. I have to identify the sender, and that's what we call an envelope or a header of the message. Okay, then this message will encapsulate the content of the message, which will then have a certain structure. This structure has to start with a specific salutation and who is supposed to receive that message. Or, like for example, I'm sending this to an organization, but I'm targeting a specific person inside that organization. So I have to say, "Dear Jane," and so on, and I send that to Jane's home. Okay, and then the content of the message, and then I identify that this is the end of the message, and then I close the message this way. Okay, so that's the structure of the message. So in all types of networks, the structure of a message is divided into these three major parts. First is the the envelope, or the what we call a header of the message. This header will have to contain a certain address, the address for both the destination and the source. Then the message content, and the message content has to have certain structure. And then the end of the message, anything that targets or identifies the end or the termination of that message. Okay. There are two important aspects regarding the message that have to be highlighted. The first one is the message size. So when that person tries to communicate uh, her thoughts into words, I cannot just bombard the person with all these words all at the same time. So I have to divide my thoughts into sentences which have a reasonable size. Each sentence will have to be self-contained, in which case it has to have a verb, it has to have a certain structure which can then be understandable by the person on the other side. Likewise, the computers, when they compose information, this information can potentially be very large. So similarly, devices have to divide the information into a reasonable sized messages that can communicate across the from one computer to another. The message format and the message size is very important. Also, there are some aspects regarding the message timing. Message timing is also very important. So just the fact that the message has a specific format and a specific size, it doesn't mean that the communication will be successful. For example, if we don't agree on a specific sequence of conversation or sequence of speech, then the messages may not be exchanged successfully. So implicitly, we have to agree on a certain sequence by which each one of us can start talking. So there is the concept of access method, which defines when a person, in which case a source or a destination, when each of them can actually speak or can communicate messages. This access method is very important to make sure that the communication will happen successfully. Another aspect regarding message timing is what we call flow control. Flow control talks about the speed of communication, in which case, how fast I can speak or I can send messages to the other person so that my words can be understood by the person on the other side. So, flow control talks about the pace of sending messages between the communication parties. Another very important concept regarding message timing is what we call response timeout. When I try to send some words to the person on the other side, I have to have a certain way of me confirming that this message has already been delivered successfully to the other person. If the message has been delivered to the person will say yes, yes, yes to indicate that the message has arrived. If I don't receive any confirmation from the other person within a certain period of time, which is what we call a timeout, then I have to conclude that the message has not been delivered successfully, in which case I have to send the message again. This concept is very important to guarantee a reliable communication. Another important aspect is what we call the message delivery options. Message delivery options talk about how the message can be delivered in a general case for a group of people. And for that, there are three delivery options or three modes for communication. The first one is what we call unicast. In unicast, the source can target a specific person within a group of people. So, for example, if I'm talking in class, I would say, please, person X, deliver your homework on time. So, in which case, my message is targeted to a certain person. Another mode of communication is simply to talk to the whole class or the whole crowd, in which case I don't target a specific person within the group, I target the whole group. So my message is actually general and I want to send this message to the whole group. Another mode for communication is what we call multicast. And in multicast, in that case, I target a specific group of people inside a very large group. So for example, I need to talk to a specific course project group inside the class. So I'd say, group 1, please deliver your documents on time. So in which case, my message is targeted to a specific subgroup of a large group. Okay. So for the rules for communication regarding the messages, we talked about the different components of a communication system, including the message and how to encode the message, how to send the message across a specific medium, and then how to decode this message on the other side. So the message has to have certain conditions, in which case we talked about the message format and size, the message timing aspects, which include access method, the flow control, and the response timeout. And then we talked about the message delivery options, which include the unicast, multicast, and